Well, hello everybody. This is another one of the continuing series of trade setups. Where we're looking at a particular trade setup, a trade setup type, and we're looking at it over a period of a few sessions. Maybe it'd be one, or not one, but two, maybe three. Where we periodically come back, we look at it, we see what it's doing, we just see if the trade's there or not, or if it didn't develop or whatever. So this particular trade mentioned by one of the members, I thought it was probably a decent one to look at because it's one we haven't done. This is a bounce trade, right? Where we're looking at a particular stock and we're looking for a bounce trade. Can we trade it on a bounce? In general, kind of four things come to my mind when I look at it, something like this, and that is, the first thing is, do the long and intermediate term trends support the stock, and is there a weak first weak spot here in the short term? So in other words, you got long, intermediate. These are a little bit extended, but everything right now is a little bit extended, so it's not ideal. You would really like this to be less, but you've got bearish here. In other words, you got hit. So to me, this is kind of a a warning sign that maybe something bigger is happening, or maybe it's just a good sell-off opportunity. And on a strong stock, it probably is going to be that, and that's why we're looking at it as a higher probability trade. You want the sectors in the general market to support you. In this case, they do for the most part, so that's the setup. As far as what else do we look for is you want to be able to have some point of significance where you can put your back up against the wall, and you want a big spill type scenario as ideally the first time it happens, and that's what this one is with Disney. And then again, I just talked about the general market and the support there on the sector in the general market. So let's look at this particular trade. Think about putting our back against the wall and look at the scenario. Now, the first thing that I see here is that you've got this congruent area here where they're overlapped. So that becomes a key spot, both on the downside and on the upside. The other key spot, and if you think about it, right, this traded from here to here basically, and then it traded again the next day down to here. That's a huge drop. You dropped what is that, 18 bucks? So you dropped a good 15% or so. So big drop. And so you're going to get some sort of a bounce off that, and of course they bounced it right off the bat this day with somewhat of a hammer reversal, but you got high volumes down here at the low. It didn't break these swing points here. It broke lots of swing points on the way down. So that tells you you're going to have a range trade most likely, and that range trade is going to set up in this region. Now ideally what you want to see is you want to see this thing roll back over and come back down to test this area down here before it tests up here. That's what you're looking for. If you don't get that scenario, then it's going to change the trade, because you want to see the lows tested before you get back into the gap area. And so right now you kind of got two little days coming up, but if it rolls back over and comes back down to test this area, that's the scenario we're looking for and we're wanting to see. So pulling this back to a weekly time frame, the thing that I see initially here is, you got a lot of volume, right? This thing, like, huge swell in volume. So you blew out a lot of folks immediately. And in this particular case, that probably is the right thing for them to do, and that is book those gains and move on to something else. Now what it didn't do, and what it almost did, is it almost came into this bar. Now that bar, the good thing about it is it didn't come into it. So if you get an undercut of this on low volume into this bar, that is an ideal bounce trade. That would be the ideal spot, right? And so what you'd like to see is stock rolls back over, like we just talked about on the daily time frame, rolls back over, comes down into this area, hopefully gets underneath this bar and even into this bar, and then flips around. And that's like the ideal place to put on a long. 102.99 is the number here. So if I pull back up that daily time frame, you know, 102.99 just underneath here. That's the ideal spot. That's where you can get the best trade on with the highest probability of success if it comes in with light volume, test these lows, and can't break it down any farther. That's the setup, that's the trade. You know, your risk reward is great. I mean, if you get it somewhere around 103, 104, once you see that test takes place, then you're only risking $2 or $3. You have a high probability in your favor, and you're looking at least back to the top of this bar, which is 110, and probably back up into this gap area, which is 114. So you're risking about $3 maybe, and you're shooting for what is that, 12? That's the kind of trade you'd like to put on. High probability, high reward, less risk. Let's see how it develops and see if a trade comes about in this in the coming days. Hello everybody, this is part 2 of the Disney trade, the bounce trade that we were looking at. And let's review where we were the last time we left this off. If you remember, the bar we were on at the time of that first video was this bar. And what we talked about was a potential range trade starting to set up. And what we wanted to see if this was going to set up was we didn't want to see it trade to the top, but instead we wanted to see it roll over and set up some sort of a test down here on this low, right? And that would set up the bounce trade. Well, it has done what we wanted in terms of rolling. Got a little hammer reversal here, a little spike up, now it's back down into that. Volumes are starting to, shrink, but we still haven't got the test of the low yet. And so even though it's proceeding and doing kind of what we wanted to see on the way down, it hasn't really set up the trade yet, but it's getting close. And so the reason for having the part 2 here is to look at what it means to come back down here and test, because it's getting close enough to where we ought to think about it. So if I pull up the weekly chart and we look at it, what we're going to see here on the weekly chart is a little range that is set up down here now. You see that little green arrow. That green arrow has the setup in this range, and let me grab this part. This bar, you can see the volume on that bar. That was the spike up bar, back in February this year. That spike up got this big push going to the top side, and now you get the big volume shrink, right? It comes back, and now you're trying to test. So ideally what you'd love to see right now, if this thing tests the bottom, and to review the numbers here, the bottom is 104.24, you'd like to see it come into this bar as well, 102.99. That would be the ideal case. This is on a weekly. See it come into this area, get under, hit into this, hold, right? You could take the position at that point on the assumption it's going to hold, and then see it reverse back over. Because the trade, if we go back to the daily chart, the trade on this is all the way back to the top of the range, which is 113, 114 almost. So some sort of a trade from that 104 area back to 114 is what you're shooting for. And of course, I don't have to tell you, that's it's almost 10%. It's a pretty good move, and it's going to be a high probability trade if it does the things that we're looking for, and that is it undercuts this, ideally trades into that 102.99 area that we just looked at, and then reverses back up. And what you'd want to do is somewhere in this area, you buy this, you put your stop right up underneath it, you risk about $1.50, $2, and you're shooting for about 10. That's the trade setup. Hasn't triggered yet, but it's getting close enough to where it was worth talking about again. Let's see if it develops farther. It doesn't have to come down there and test it. That's what you're looking for. But like any other trade, you monitor, you wait, and you pounce when it's time. Let's see if it develops this next week.